So what is everyone doing with their time? Whether it be chicken coops or watching Netflix, we're going to break it down for you for today's episode of Gen Z Deep Dive, Season 2, Episode 14. I'm your host, Aaron Brown, chair of the Institute for Generational Dynamics. And my friend Kay Hiramine shot a very interesting article over to me the other day that I want to walk through with you guys. But one thing that millennials and Gen X are up to, raising baby chickens. Chicken sales, baby chick sales are up 500% since Corona-cation began. And since we're in day 987, we might as well figure out what everybody's doing with their time uh, during this Corona-cation. With baby chicks, it seems that people are buying chicken coops off of Amazon, low end $179, and they are spending upwards of a few $1,000s, especially on a colonial style mansion for their chicken. One of the challenges with the chickens is that you are actually never able to achieve economies of scale so that you can make money or you can break even off of your egg consumption. However, not everything is about money. And many millennials, Gen Xers, they are finding a satisfaction in raising animals and caring for them during this COVID crisis. Now, let's jump over to what I'd really like for us to explore today, and that is what are people doing with their time? So, as you see, if you're watching live, if you're listening, I'm sorry, I'll do my best to do the color commentary. But if you're watching on our YouTube channel or Facebook Live, you're able to see this. So, Gen Z, uh, according to the Visual Capitalist, there was a study done in the US and the UK. They had about 4,000 participants in this sample. And the only downside of this sample is we don't exactly know what the consumption levels were before COVID. Now, we can go back, we can look at those things, but with this sample, we're not able to say who, how much media or whatnot these 4,000 people were consuming before the crisis began. The big thing that we see with Gen Z, and it shouldn't really be any surprise, are they are consuming online videos and online TV streaming uh, for their entertainment, but also for information on the COVID crisis. I think what's important to note, and this is no surprise, Gen Z doesn't watch broadcast TV, so it's very low, 24%. And the other important thing is online press. So Gen Z is not tuned into the news. So when people, again, this is one of the drums that I beat. They say that Gen Z is an activist generation. They're not. Maybe they are keyboard warriors just like every other generation. But for the most part, they really don't know what's going on unless they're consuming that information through online videos. And then let's see. The one last thing that I thought was interesting was physical press, a 9% consumption rate across the 4,000 on uh, consuming physical press. Now let's jump down here to millennials. And I think it's funny that we have a man bun for our millennial. I think that is a jab at us millennials. Who doesn't want to be a samurai warrior with a top knot? I mean, come on, those are some bad dudes. So I'll take the top knot if I could grow one. So what we see with consumption that's just a little bit different than their Gen Z successors is that Gen Z is consuming online videos at a greater rate, but consuming less online TV streaming than millennials. What we also see is millennials' consumption of the physical press or printed press is up about 9% compared to Gen Z. Another interesting one is online press. So if we look at Gen Z, I'm just going to scroll back up to get the exact number, 21%. Uh, Millennials are consuming online press at a rate of 15% more than their Gen Z successors. And then the other interesting thing is the consumption of broadcast TV. They're consuming it at about 10 or 11%, I think, than their Gen Z successors. So the only other thing that caught my attention was music streaming. Gen Z has, as of late, been known as a music streaming generation, but it seems like they're consuming less in order to watch more online videos and online TV streaming as compared to millennials. So very surprising. Spotify has been successful with the Gen Z audience. So this was a little bit surprising across this sample. Now let's get to our friends Gen X. As you can see, uh, their their consumption rate looks completely different than their millennial and Gen Z successors. Uh, so, most notably, broadcast TV is almost through the roof. 45% of their time is spent consuming broadcast TV. Um, and then what I found really intriguing was that their physical press consumption was only 7%. So millennials are consuming physical press at a greater rate than Gen X. Online press, they are actually consuming at 31%, which is greater than their or which is less than their millennial counterparts. So this is very intriguing that Gen X is age and their ages 38 to 56. I should have given those years for you guys, but it's just interesting that they are consuming some of these things at a greater rate digitally than their successors. Uh, One other thing that we want to clue in on is the consumption of books and literature. So Gen X is consuming literature at about 21%. We see millennials at 20%, which is a little, which shouldn't be surprising because millennials actually use libraries more than any other generational demographic. And then we look at our friends Gen Z, they are consuming literature at about 18%. So if the libraries are closed, chances are you're not getting your books. The other thing is, if you don't have money to spend on Amazon to buy books, because that's how I have Christmas every day, is by ordering through Amazon. That may be a challenge, but we cannot forget our friends, the baby boomers. Uh, and they are age 57 to 64, according to this chart. I would take a couple of issues with those years, but broadcast TV, 42% of baby boomers' consumption is broadcast TV because Fox and Friends is not going to watch itself, guys. Physical press is way down. So what we are seeing is that the physical press is essentially dead in America and the UK. So people are not interested in the traditional newspaper journalism. Not that we actually have real journalism on TV anymore through our broadcast TV. But lots of consumption are essentially just down with baby boomers. Uh, so it seems like everything is channeling into their broadcast TV uh, consumption, and that is where they're getting their entertainment, information, news, all of those things. And then technological aspects, they're just not cluing into that. Even literature, they're not reading that much, but they are online TV streaming at about a rate of 21%. So that is interesting. So let's just jump down here to this chart. And we take a look at quarantine internet activities, the percentage. And let me just take a sip of my Nikolai High Ohm cold brew coffee brewed here in Colorado Springs. I'll take a sip so that you can vicariously live through me. How are people spending their time? What are they doing? Well, all They're searching for information on the coronavirus. And this is definitely surprising. Shows the human condition that when there is a crisis, we almost essentially cannot think about anything else. I don't mean that to be unempathetic or unsympathetic, but taking our minds off of things is probably not what human beings are good at. Uh, Millennials and Gen X seem to be taking the COVID crisis the most seriously, but only by a few more percentage points. Boomers, not so much. So essentially, Gen Z, Millennials, Gen X, one out of three, or I'm sorry, two out of three in those demographics are taking it seriously. Only about one out of two Boomers is taking it seriously as far as looking for information. Listening to music, Gen Z wins this one with listening to music. So it must be, between digital, Spotify, Apple Music, but physical records have come back in vogue, and they've come back in vogue very fiercely with Gen Z. So if you are looking at record sales, chances are it's Gen Z and younger millennials who are purchasing those items. And then watching movies, shows, Gen Z, millennials, Gen X, one out of two is spending their time uh, as their quarantine activity. And then near the last chart, I found this a little bit more concerning if I'm reading between the lines correctly. And you just have to understand that I am more of a conservative libertarian when it comes to my political values. And so realizing that uh, people take the World Health Organization seriously. I definitely have my biases or biases against WHO, especially when it's a bureaucracy radicalized against Taiwan. I have some grave concerns over that they think it's acceptable to take a democracy and force it into a communistic regime. The government website. So people are looking at the government website for information, and government emails and newsletters is predominantly what the generation see as trustworthy sources. Um, if you've followed this pandemic the way that I have, you have come to realize that the information is constantly shifting and changing. There's a lot of flip-flopping and genuinely just, outrageous commentary on, or outrageous conclusions. For instance, we need to social distance. Okay, I think a lot of us can get on board with that. We understand the need for that. But then you also have Dr. Fauci saying, well, if you need to hook up, just be safe about it. Well, hooking up is the exact opposite of social distancing. So there's, some weird things that are coming out of our medical communities with these things. And then finally, the last one that I want to look at is the need for pandemic positivity. So percentage of people who would consider paying for a subscription they didn't have before the outbreak. People, 30% would consider Netflix, 20% of Gen Z would consider uh, Disney Plus, 22% of millennials would consider Disney Plus. Let's jump down here to Spotify. 13% of Gen Z would consider getting a Spotify subscription. 19% of millennials would consider that. What I think is really interesting, if you can see my cursor kind of flying around it, is that 43% of Gen Z would say none. I wouldn't consider getting any. 44% of millennials say, no, I'm not going to get any more subscriptions. Gen X, 66%, so two out of three Gen X. And then 80% baby boomers, no, I'm not getting a new subscription. Let's break that down. Why? I think the big reason why is that 43% of Gen Z doesn't necessarily have money unless their parents give it to them. They're still on the young side. Our oldest Gen Z are about age 23, 24. So we need to take that into account when it comes to spending. 44%. Millennials are going to be working 3 jobs till the world comes to an end. So they're probably like, oh, not trying to spend any more money. Uh, Gen X, Gen X and millennials, they're in the workforce and maybe they've been laid off. Maybe they've been furloughed. They've lost their job. Now is not the time to spend money if you've lost your job. And then 80% say of baby boomers say I wouldn't consider a new subscription. Well, why? We just saw the chart. They don't play around with subscriptions, especially if it's internet based. So, if you're a marketing firm in the age of COVID or a product developer, uh, choose wisely how you're positioning your products and how you're making them available and figuring out who your niche market is. Because not everybody, i.e., baby boomers, consume information through uh, the interwebs. So, if you want to reach out to me on my Instagram, IGD_Aaron Brown, Twitter as well, IGD_Aaron Brown. You can always email me at aaron@draaronbrown.com. Would love to converse with you. Or just leave a comment on our Facebook Live video. If you listen to our podcast, please go over and leave us a review. I'm Aaron Brown, chair of the Institute for Generational Dynamics. Thank you for joining us.